שלום לכולם, אנחנו בקולוקוויום פקולטי, בעצם האחרון לסמסטר זה, היום יום שני ה-18 לראשון 2021, ובלי יותר מדי דיבורים, חוץ מלאחל לכולנו סוף סמסטר מוצלח בעוד שבוע ביום, אני מעביר את השרביט לדניאל. בבקשה.
Okay, תודה. So I'll speak English. I'll just share my presentation. Just a second. Oh, sorry. Just a second, I closed it. Okay, can you see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Danny. Hi, everyone. I see a lot of people I know and a lot of people I don't know. So it's good to get to know new people. My name is Daniel Metcalf, and I'm a part-time senior lecturer in industrial design. And the part-time means that I divide my time between research and teaching and working in my practice, which is mainly involves design and planning projects on a landscape level. Though I do come from industrial design, and I do work on a few projects of industrial design also. And for me, the most maybe interesting thing about this opportunities that I have to work both in academia and outside is the places where the two worlds meet, and how I can bring maybe ideas from research into practice, or bring ideas from practice into teaching or into research. And in today's talk, I want to try and go back and forward between the two and see the different links and connections that could be. And the topic I'm going to talk about is things that I've learned about designing for humans while doing multi-species design, which is my main field of interest. So as humans, we often look to animals in order to learn about ourselves. So about our evolutionary path, or our physiology, or health, or the process of learning, or even about behavior.
עוף במרקוף, זה מה שאתה שואל? לא, לא. פשוט שום בתובלנים.
Sorry, someone's not on mute? Yeah, okay. So in this talk, I want to talk about things that I've learned about designing for humans through looking at the process of designing for animals. So in this sense, it's not really an account of a specific research project, but it's more a reflection on past research and practice and teaching in the field of multi-species design, and looking for insights about the practice of design in general. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about today can be taken as prospects of maybe possible future research or starting points of a discussion. So I look forward to hearing your thoughts at the end, and I'll really try to leave enough time for a discussion at the end. So first I'll say a few words about multi-species design, which is a design practice that is situated in the meeting point of animals, humans, and the artificial world. So the technosphere, everything that we modify for our own needs. Yeah. And it looks at how animals interact with the designed objects and how they are affected by design and how they affect design. But mostly for me, it's looking at the meeting points between humans and animals as designed experiences, as something that we can influence in a way. So how might we reduce potential conflicts or minimize the negative effects of the built environment on wildlife, try to increase biodiversity within human spaces, or address the ongoing alienation of humans from other species, yeah, and try to rekindle kind of inbuilt or ingrained biophilic sentiments that we have to other species, which is we see is getting lost. Yeah? So there's a multitude of wild animal species that live in proximity or overlap with human systems. And the social and ecological value of these multi-species assemblages is gaining interest, yeah, by a wide range of disciplines, from conservationists to studies of the benefits of human-animal interaction. And these can range from really the micro, looking at one child and one ant, for example, interacting, to really large scale of all of mankind and biodiversity, and to see the role of biodiversity in human well-being. So for many of us who live in the city, our best chance of interaction with wild species occurs within the city itself. So urban fauna is one of the most immediate and direct links that we have to the natural world. But these encounters are mostly left to chance. They're not really designed, or not really sort of, and a lot of times they lead to conflicts which may undermine the benefits of human-animal interaction. So, so if you want to take seriously the better inclusion of wild animals in human-dominated habitats, then we need to learn to design our places to accommodate the needs of wild species. We have to learn to look at the world from their point of view and to understand how they perceive and interact with the environment. And this can be a city, but it can also be a field or a park or any designed or any human-dominated system. And this poses interesting challenges regarding the act of designing itself. So how do you treat an animal as a client of design? How do you find out what an animal needs or wants? How do you speculate and measure an animal's reaction to a design proposal? How do you take measures not to harm or to allure or to create dependency with your design? So if we talk about animals in the context of design, then we have to try and negotiate these terms or ideas that come from the design world and see how they layer on top of the world of other fields that deal with animal studies, like ecology. And a lot of time we have to, there's a lot of negotiation going on. It's not a very easy transition. But what I wanted to talk about today is that reflecting back on this process of designing or thinking about designing for animals for, I don't know, over 10 years now, we can also learn a lot about designing for our own species and about the relationships that we have with designed artifacts. And this goes back, you know, to our origins as animals ourselves. So we kind of go to an extreme example of designing for animals, and through this we learn about our relationship with design. So for today's talk, I tried to make a list of things that I think in my practice have been influenced by designing for animals that I can reflect on regarding designing for humans. So the first one I called Somatic Design. This is the role of and the generation of somatic, which is embodied knowledge, yeah, and I'll talk about this in length in a bit, within the design process. The second part is about the role of empathy in design, and especially I'm interested in what stays on in the aftermath of designing. So in design, we often talk about empathy being the first stage of design, but I noticed with animals that I designed for or was involved in projects that related to them, I still have a very special relationship with them even years after the project finished. So I'm interested in this kind of lingering on of the empathy after the project. The idea of non-domestication, which is very important when we talk about animals, but if we think about it in terms of humans, it's also very interesting. So especially when we talk about technology, which creates dependency, which a lot of our technology does. So the classic example is Waze, which instead of teaching us to navigate, navigates for us. So we become dependent on the technology. And when we think about animals, we want to create designs that doesn't create dependency. Yeah? And there's different ways for doing it for animals, which we can maybe reflect back on designing for humans, to imagine technologies that doesn't make us dependent, but teaches us something new and then sets us free, for example. The idea of ontological design. So this is the classic idea of how what we design designs us back. And outlandish design speaks about our perceptions of aesthetics. And when we talk about aesthetics of biodiversity, then aesthetics are not in line. Yeah, when I look at the design objects that I created for animals, they look a bit alien, and this is because a kind of not more than human perspectives went into the design process, and this created a different kind of aesthetic. So I think if we want to think about including more wildlife within our habitats, and we have to reconsider our ideas of aesthetics, which recently are very, very sterile and clean. Yeah? And this is often problematic if you want to create more biodiversity, which needs more complexity of habitat, for example. But because talking about all these things would take me a week, I think, I decided to just focus on the first one and to talk about somatic design. And I think we can leave the rest for maybe for the future. So when I first started designing for animals, I wanted to look at the appropriation of methods used for designing for humans on animals. So I see there's something in the chat. Should I check it while we go? No, okay, I'll react at the end. But go on writing, and then we can look at the chat at the end. So when I first started, I wanted to look at design methods for human and how we can use them on animals. So to see what works, what we might need to reimagine or develop new methods. So, and in particular, I was interested in the kind of knowledge that we rely on when we design. So, for example, in this project, which involved the redesign of this marine concrete structure to include multi-species perspectives, I used different methods of design ethnography, including observation, visual diaries, interviews, photo and video recordings, in order to gain insights onto how different actors interact with this concrete structure. So this is at low tide, and at high tide, it's completely covered with water. And there's different animals and humans that interact with it in different stages or different times of the day and of the year. So I wanted to see if I could redesign this concrete structure, which at the moment is very sterile, to see if it can include into it a more than human perspectives. Yeah? And although all of these methods that I talked about were conceived for humans, I found that I can apply them with some success also to animals. So I can look at animals and observe them and write them and sketch them and take videos and analyze them and go diving here when it's high tide and see how they interact with it. But still, parallel to this, I was also needed to rely on scientific knowledge. So I was reading everything I could find about these animals and about their behavior and how they interact with the environment. But at the same time, I all the time felt that the level to which I could understand human behavior or human interaction with the structure was much higher than it was for how I could understand how animals interact with it. And more increasingly, I felt that this knowledge was situated within my body. Yeah. So, for example, when I look at people walking on the structure, I already know and what it feels like to walk. Yeah, and I know what it feels like to walk on a structure that might be slippery. So if somebody stops or kneels or almost trips, I can understand what's going on. I can relate to their feelings. Yeah, even if I don't understand the human behavior, I can still ask. And a lot of this was much harder when it came to other species. I felt that I had integrated the knowledge of what it is to be human and human interacting with this structure, which I didn't have for other species. And I knew I could never overcome this gap, but still, because this was an exercise in trying to flatten hierarchies and treat animals and humans as equal stakeholders in the design process, I wanted to try, and I wanted to see what I could learn from trying. Yeah, this was a kind of exercise or my first exercise with multi-species design, trying to see if this is something that has any meaning, both research meaning and practical meaning also. So through this, I started thinking about the use of somatic knowledge when designing. And I want to try and illustrate what I mean with an example. Okay, so look at this chair and imagine sitting down slowly onto this chair. And try to feel what it feels in your body to sit on this chair. So is the chair comfortable? What does the material feel like on your body? What does a point of contact with the seat feel like? Now imagine leaning back and trying to feel what the rest feels like when you lean on it. And how is your head supported by your spine when you sit on this chair? Yeah. So trying to imagine this creates, or for me, creates a kind of feeling in my body. So I can beyond just imagining having a mental image of sitting on a chair, I can actually feel something in my body, which is different from the feelings that I have sitting on the chair that I'm sitting on now. And this is because while I imagine sitting on this chair, I evoke different memories and past sensations that I can relate to and draw on to when imagining sitting on this chair. So it turns out that somatic knowledge, like this, has an important part in the act of designing. And there have been different studies, mainly within the context of phenomenological research tradition, that suggests that the physical act of making and crafting in design involves the embodied mind. So this means that the abstract cognitive process, that we imagine something and we try to create it, is intertwined, and linked to the physical, physiological bodily process. So what I'm doing with my hands and how I'm interacting with the material itself, and the feedback that I'm getting all the time, and the memory. And studies in this field have been mainly focused on the act of making itself. So in crafts like woodworking and blowing grass and throwing clay. And these studies start from a phenomenological tradition and mostly linked to Merleau-Ponty's embodied cognition. But in recent years, there have been also studies from neurosciences that try to show the other part of the equation. So what goes on biologically in our body when we interact, or when we imagine, or when we feel with our body. So these research like this has been mainly on the act of making, but other studies like the ones that we see here in the example have also suggested that the act of thinking and planning in design also depends on accumulated embodied knowledge. So think, for example, about the accumulated bodily knowledge that you have of sitting on chairs and how this can feed into an act of designing a chair, and how it would be different for someone who's never sat on a chair to design a chair. So we depend on our experience, life experience, and bodily sensations in order to also to plan something, not even to take it out, not just in the act of making itself. And so in this research, for example, it says that through our physical experiences of the material world, we create mental images that we rely on in the design process. And this, I think this makes sense for us as designers, because we know that it's very hard to design something from an outside. We often need to immerse ourselves into a situation in order to design for that situation. Because I was dealing with animals and I was lacking the accumulated bodily knowledge that I felt I needed in order to design for them, I became interested in the idea of maybe artificially creating this knowledge in my body. So again, all of these are just thoughts that I had in order to try and experience something in a different way and to see where it leads. So, and I'll get back in a minute to the point of is it possible or not possible, and what do we do with this knowing that I can never really experience the world as a different animal. But first I want to get back to our chair. So I want you to imagine sitting on this chair as a cat this time. Okay, so rather than thinking about a cat sitting on the chair, try to imagine yourself as a cat sitting on the chair. Okay, so try feeling it. What does it feel like to be a cat sitting on this chair? And for a moment, I don't want you to think about whether it's possible or not possible for you to feel what it feels like to be a cat on the chair, just to try and see if it creates a sensation in your body, okay? So think about the point of contact again, and about the material and how the material meets the body of the cat or your body as a cat. So I'm asking you for a certain degree of suspension of disbelief here, and I really promise that we'll get back to this in a moment when we talk about humans, but my main question here is if it felt in your body differently when you imagined sitting on the chair as a cat and as a human before. So over the years, I've tried different ways of creating this sense of embodied feeling of what it might mean or feel like to experience the world as another creature. And this involved a lot of imagination and role-playing and working with dancers in the studio, like in this picture, and using props and simulations. So here, these are two limpets, for example, fighting about territory, and these are barnacles feeding. And in the course that I teach, which is called Human, Animal, Machine, in the last semester, the whole course was dedicated to trying to see the world from the point of view of animals and to see where this leads us, or what we can learn by trying to do this. And the exercise in the middle of the course was for the students to design something that we called an Umwelt apparatus, which means a kind of device that helps you see the world through the Umwelt, which is the perceptive world of another species. And the student had to design props for themselves that would help them see and experience the world as other species. So this is Rotem, for example, who built a device that lets him look forward while he's eating grass, like the goat does. So I don't know if you can see the eyeballs of the goat looking forward while it's eating. And Rotem does the same with this kind of mirror that he has. And this was the group of Gali, Shir, and Asaf who built a kind of device that lets them see the world first from the height of a rat and to both sides. So there's two phones and one phone in the middle that is showing them what the two eyes that see to the side see. And they're using their fingers here as whiskers in order to feel, to sense the surface like a rat would do. So a rat would look to the sides, but sense forward with the whiskers. So this is the idea of this device. And here, Hannah, Marianne, and Siran tried to mimic the vision of a chameleon, and they played with a lot of different mirrors and a lot of different devices, trying to look at different places. But the idea here for them was to see if their brain can get used to processing multiple images at the same time. And it was interesting that they could get used to seeing things through this kind of broken, fragmented mirrors, which at the beginning, the mind makes no sense of it, but with time you start to understand how to negotiate the environment through this fragmented view. And Yehia and Rania built a kind of device that let them move like snakes, just with the core muscles instead of using the limbs, like a snake would. So you use the core muscles of your body in order to create movement. And this was Amiel and Ronnie who made a kind of movement dictionary for moving like a prey mantis, and understanding the body language or the language of the prey mantis, which is mainly body language. So the focus in all of these experiments was not about whether or not we can actually see or experience the world from the point of view of other species, but on what changes and expands within us when we try to do so. And obviously also if this can inform a design process, because the second stage of this was to design something for the animals. Yeah, and this is just the beginning in order to try and expand our understanding of the animal. So I can say that for me personally, a lot of things change when I do this, but maybe the main thing is that the way we view the animal as a complex and multidimensional being, and the kind of respect and responsibilities that we hold for the animal really changes. And you see also with the students, I see kind of gradual change in the way they talk about the animal and treat the animal and relate to the animal along the process. So I don't really want to go into details about this too much, because the idea of the talk today is to try and bring this back to humans and to ask if or can we intentionally create somatic knowledge in our body for a specific design activity. So with humans, we assume, or I used to assume, that I have a bodily experience of what it means to be human, and I use this when I design. But the question is, if I can intentionally create more knowledge like this that would suit a specific project. So this can be useful, for example, if we're designing for people that are different for us in the way they perceive or interact with the world. Yeah? So there are some evident cases of this, such as the inclusive design toolkit developed in the University of Cambridge, which offers us simulations, for example, of dexterity impairment. So this example, here, this example here, which kind of simulates muscular dysfunction and dexterity, and to see how you can use or interact with objects with this, or these glasses that simulate different rates of visual impairment, or software that can demonstrate different hearing and vision impairments. And you can use this software, for example, for interacting with different websites. So we see that already for humans, we have different techniques that we create in order to understand. Yeah, and we know that there's simulators for understanding ADD and ADHD and other examples like this. So obviously, even with these simulations, I can never really understand how it is to live with ADHD or to be blind, for example. But still, something in this brings me closer to that point of view. And my argument regarding animals is that because animals are even more different than us, then we have to try even harder, not Not to say that because it's impossible, we shouldn't even try at the beginning. But that's a different discussion. So I believe that this practice of trying to create a somatic experience, a bodily experience, because instead of these simulations, we could read, for example, or we could talk with somebody who has a visual impairment and hear from them what it means. But until we create a physical body experience in our body, it's hard to use this information for me in a design context. So I think these exercises have an important meaning. And I think we do this much more commonly and unintentionally a lot in design projects. So every time we immerse ourselves into the field, or when we touch a new material that we encounter, or try to play with a new hinge that we found in someone's house, or when we change our point of view and when we play around and simulate different situations in our client's experience, we're trying to create for ourselves this somatic experience that we will use in the design process afterwards. And what I'm suggesting is that that we can be even more conscious about this in the context of design. So we can ask ourselves at the beginning of a project, what is the kind of somatic knowledge that I would need for this project, and how can I actively try and create it within my body? So I want to give just one example, and then we'll open it up for a discussion. So one of it's a bit of an unorthodox example, and I won't go too much into details, but I'll just talk a bit about this project. So this project in our office was to create a master plan for a youth village that is a home of 450 young people aged 13 to 18, and a lot of them are, or maybe half of them are immigrants, and half of them come from difficult backgrounds, and they live in this place. They live and learn in the same place. And when we started the project, we spoke with the youth and with the teachers and instructors and facilitators and people in charge of maintenance, and we spent a lot of time on site, and we took part in different activities, and we went to eat in the dining room, and we tried to create a kind of feeling for ourselves of living or interacting with this place. But one thing that came up a lot during our research was the topic of smoking. So the policy about smoking in this place is not explicit. So the youth know that they're not supposed to smoke, but the instructors know that many of them arrive smokers already, so they believe that it's wrong to expect them to stop immediately. So there's a kind of loose relationship between, or kind of loose rules about smoking. And we saw that this came up really a lot of times in the discussions with the youth and with the teachers. So for example, we asked them to draw the places where they walk on a typical day. Yeah, and this is a kind of compilation of that. And this is places they like and dislike. And when we took these maps and we tried to get an insight into them, into what's going on. So for example, there's a short way to go to the school, but a lot of the kids go from here, which is a longer way. And when you ask them why, they say that when you walk from here, there's no one, you can smoke a cigarette because no one sees you. And when you walk from here, everybody sees you, so you don't walk from here. Or the places that are that have a lot of green hearts and red X's, which means that there are places that are controversial, that people love and hate them simultaneously, as the places where people go to smoke. So there was a lot this topic came up a lot, but we didn't really know what we can do with it. And part of the idea of the master plan was also to try and deal with this, so to decide where are the places where it's okay to smoke and where are the places where it's not okay to smoke. And because I'm not a smoker and I didn't really have an embodied knowledge of understanding what it means, I decided that the next time I would go there, I would bring a cigarette and I would try to smoke the cigarette without anyone seeing me. So this experience of trying to do this, so first trying to find a place where I could not be seen, and then a place that is not too windy, because apparently it's hard to light a cigarette when it's windy, and then all these feelings that came of fear of being caught, but also a kind of sense of doing something that is naughty, and a kind of mixed sense of empowerment, but also shame, and a lot of, and then hearing voices and trying to move to another place in order to not be caught, and all of this came out really in a physical. And while I'm talking about this now, I can really feel these feelings again. Yeah, so this is something about our memory also that evokes these feelings again, and just this tiny experiment that I did really helped me understand a lot of things that were going on here. And the idea of because we were struggling a lot with the question if smoking areas should be hidden or should be in plain sight. And maybe if there's a kind of shame in smoking, then we have to put these places in plain sight. And we even thought about putting them in a place that overlooks the sport area. So while you're smoking, you see other people working out. So this created, or these feelings created a whole discussion around this, which really fed into our design process afterwards. And this was out of actively trying to create the feelings that I didn't have in my body, but in order to try and see if it can feed into my design process and it can help me when I'm designing. So for sure, it could help me when I was trying to relate and understand and see the point of view of the youth that I was designing for, but also in these ideas came up again and again while we were designing. So yeah, so that's this experiment, but this project and a lot of other projects involved also a lot of other moments of this. So maybe my advice that I would end with is to try and be conscious about this when you start a project, and to see, because an embodied process is something that takes time. So you have to set time aside to this, especially when you go into the field and when you work in a new place, and just stop and feel the place and see what kind of feelings you have first as a person, and then maybe how you can add or open up this repertoire of feelings that you have in order to include also your clients. So thank you, and I think we'll open it up for the discussion now. I'll close the presentation and stop sharing. So I'm looking at the chat. I don't know if there's questions here. Classic example is a car road system. Many of us have become completely dependent on the car. Yeah, of course. This relates to what we were talking about at the beginning. And Mirav says it sounds like design nudging. Yeah. So it's nudging ourselves in a way. Yeah. So design nudging relates to behavioral design and how you can get people to behave in a way that you, or to nudge them in the direction instead of to tell them what to do, but to try and nudge them in the direction that you want. Yeah. So the smoking was related to design nudging. So questions or thoughts or reactions? Yeah, just go ahead, I think. Yeah.
So, Carl, you were first. You want to start?
Yes, thanks. You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, but my remark about the car was not made without a reason, because it shows how blind we can be for the diversity there is in people. And assuming that we're dependent on waste, assumes already that we're using a car. And this relates to your lecture. It's very interesting. I really enjoyed listening to it. And I had two feelings, okay? One is, what is this? Designing for animals and trying to understand them, and we don't even make the effort to understand the diversity of people. And we ignore large shares of the population designing our spaces. And now we're going to make a fuss about animals. Okay, I'll specify in a minute. And the second is embodiment, great, but there's so much more in humans that shape their experience. And if I talk about transport, having money or not having money is so fundamental in how you experience the transport system and how stressed you can be of getting to places and how you struggle to get around. And if you have money, and even if you're without a car, you just order a taxi and you get home, at least when you live in a metropolitan area and not somewhere in a suburb far away. And so the first, so embodiment is great, but it ignores the much richer diversity of features of a human, features, I'm not sure it's the right word, that shape their experience. And my first, like this feeling, and it's not outrage, because, you know, I think we should design much better for animals, yes, and it is fundamental for our well-being in the long term, for sure. And even for our small happiness, when I see a bird, I am happy, it really does me good. So yes, we should design for them. But I'm afraid that I just want to hear your voice, you know, about how we can use your approach to be much more inclusive in designing for people and understanding their wide diversity, people with children, without children, not only about impairments, about so many things that shape people's ability to enjoy our environments, and basically have been shaped for middle-class people with cars. They ignore children, they ignore youth, they ignore older age people who have to walk to the bus stop, and they have to stop every 200 meters because they just cannot walk without sitting. And if there's no benches, they cannot get there. And these things are so fundamental. Just your response. It was my thought. So I really enjoyed it, and we should talk more.
Thank you. Yeah, so the point of the talk today was to try and bring it back to humans. And then maybe I talk too much about animals because I try to explain where I come from. But the idea was to see if we can, out of trying to create inclusive design for animals, to see how we can bring this idea of sensing the space or seeing the space as another person also to humans. And there's a lot of talk about inclusive design. And I think you're right that we can do more. I think this first step is to acknowledge it and maybe to see within the system we're designing, to see who are the different stakeholders or what are the different points of view that we should consider, and to see, okay, this one I can relate to because this is similar to me. Yeah, this is middle class with a car, like you say. But there's students, maybe I can relate to students because I was a student. I was a poor student once myself, and I had to take the public transportation, and I didn't have money for a taxi. And there's children, I can maybe relate to them through my past experience as a child, and I can find ways to re-evoke these feelings, especially if I just go down to their level, height level, and look at the space from their point of view. This is basic, but I can do other things. I can try and play with playgrounds or interact with it as they would. And for some people, maybe I don't have the life experience in order to understand it. So I have to try and overcome this gap in a different way. So I can spend time with them. I can interview them. This is the idea of empathy in design. So kind of evoking this empathy. But what I'm trying to say is that beyond just relating to their point of view, I think we can actively try and be creative about creating the point of view for ourselves. So maybe if we want to walk a street like someone who's elderly and has difficulty walking does, we can create for ourselves some kind of physical constraint that would make us want to sit every 5 minutes. So we can do all these things. We just have to be creative about them. This is what I'm saying. We have to first know what we're trying to do, and then think about creative ways of doing it. Yeah, does this make sense? I mean, for a lot of people, it's strange. Yeah, when people design things, and I say, okay, but did you try it? Did you interact with it? And they would say, no, it's not for me. It's for a child. Yes, but you can evoke these feelings in yourself. You can remember what it means to be a child. So I think we have to use our body or be conscious about how we use our body within the design process much more. This is maybe the main point of what I was trying to say.
I think I just want to comment. Can I comment a little? My son is in the background, so I'm sorry. I want to say that there is a parallel lines between the somatic design approach and acting. Something in acting and learning how to get inside a character in Stanislavski. When I was in high school, we studied about Stanislavski, and he said that if you want to act the character, we need to be the character. And whether it's an elderly person, like you said, we need to have constraints to ourselves in order to understand it. And I would like, maybe if you can elaborate a little bit more about somatic design, because it was, אני כרגע מדברת, אז שומעים אותי. Because it's eye-opening to hear about this approach, and I also tried to look on it online, but I didn't find a lot of material about it. So maybe you can elaborate about it a little.
Yeah. So I think the main studies that there are relate to the act of making and to crafts, and so about how woodworkers understand and interact with the wood while they're working it, and how they know there's knowledge in their muscles, that they can feel the resistance of they don't even have to see the eyes in the wood to know that this is the hard part. They can feel the resistance in their hand, and they know how to react to it. They know to go up a bit or down a bit. And this is in all the crafts, the somatic knowledge. And the main research about this is in crafts. But some recent studies, which again, is stuff I looked up in order, just in the context of this talk. It's not something that I do or that I've had time to dedicate time to. But there are some studies that talk about the act of making and planning, designing and planning, and how this relates to our body. And I think for me, it's about our bodily experience. So I think it would be very hard to design a chair if you never sat on a chair in your life. And it's hard to design a nesting box for a bird if you haven't lived in a nesting box. So for me, these things are parallel. But I think we can, so like I would go and sit on a chair, or when I'm building a chair, I would make mock-ups and sit on them and see if it's comfortable before I build the final chair. I think we can try and do this also with animals. Again, it's more about what changes in us. It's about this kind of devotion or dedication that we create to the process that really influences the outcome at the end. And I think it's the same with people. If we take the time to learn about someone else, even if we can't view the world from their point of view, but if we dedicate the time to them and we create kind of respect for them within ourselves, then our design would be different. Yeah? It would influence the outcomes at the end. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I raised my hand. Is it okay to ask a question?
Of course.
Thanks. First of all, thank you, Daniel, for a very interesting lecture. I really enjoyed it. Nice images. And thank you. I mean, I was impressed by the way you handled Carl's question that kind of try to ask the foundation or the base of your research. You're talking about animals. He's talking about why don't you do research about people? And I find the way that you answer, the way that you answer, Carl, very, very nice and I would say intelligent. So thank you for that also. There will always be somebody that try to lose the foundation of your research. So my question is about your methodology. to the more academic aspects of your research. And I wonder, how would you do an academic evaluation of the human or animal-centered design? How would you check academically that the thing that you designed for animal actually works? If you can't, put yourself in their place, how would you do it, in a different way or in an academic way? Because your talk was more, I would say, practice-oriented, and I'm looking in the more academic aspect of that field. How would you do research in this field?
Yeah. So yeah, I'll answer first about designing for animals, and then about how I think that somatic design can maybe become an academic research, which is something that I haven't done yet. So with animals, this project that I presented about designing this concrete structure for humans and animals was during my PhD, and I had supervisors that were ecologists and geomorphologists and designers, and there was an ongoing negotiation about this all the time, about the research method. So in order to check the response of the ecosystem to my designs, I had to draw on other disciplines, on ecological knowledge, and then you check recruitment. So I had different samples, and I would come every 3 weeks and check, like in classical ecological studies, I would have these kind of squares and I would count species within them. But for the ecologists, they wanted this to be an experiment, or they wanted my test site to be separate from people, but I wanted to see also how people interact with this at the same time as the ecology. So after negotiation, we decided we would put it in a place where there's both people and animals, and look at the interactions also. But in this sense, it's not a very clean ecological study, or it's not very sterile, because, for example, one day I came and I saw a child playing with snails within one of my test samples and taking snails out. And then his mom said, no, you can't take them up, you have to put them back. So he put them back and he brought more snails into this place. So you can see how this is really messing with the data, with the ecological data. But still also within this study, we could see recruitment, or we could separate it. Yes, theoretically you could have one test site that only measures the ecology and one test site that measures the kind of multi-species ethnography. But for me, my main research methodology was research by design. So my whole process was trying to understand what a design discipline or a design process that looks at non-human species would look like. And in order to do this, I immersed myself into such a process. And the knowledge that was created through the research was mainly out of reflection. So I did studies, some ecological studies and some ethnographical studies and surveys and evaluations by experts of the designs, but the main methodology was a reflection on my own process, and trying to link between series and between to kind of build a conceptual framework that would link reconciliation ecology, or the idea of conservation within human habitats, with changes that are happening in the humanities and multi-species ethnography and animal geography, and linking them together into design, and trying to see if we can create new ideas or new concepts for design, like the idea of somatic design, or the idea of creating separations between humans and animals that are not built on physical barriers but are behavioral. So kind of to see what kind of concepts we could use, or we could draw out of these, and the next stage is to test them. So I've been testing them or trying them in practice, but also the idea is to see if we can bring some of them back into more rigorous academic studies also. So this is about the multi-species design, but about somatic design. So again, the main way this was studied is through phenomenology and using theories like Merleau-Ponty's embodied cognition and others. But then when as neuroscience develops, people started looking at these things also from the point of view of neurosciences, and to see what happens within your brain, for example, when you're interacting with a material and how the process goes back and forward. So there are ways of testing this also, but I don't know, I still don't have the definitive answer about how it's right to do it. Yeah, and a lot of things that I would like to study, I'm not studying because I don't feel that we have the kind of rigorous method in order to study them. But I think for me, intellectually, it's still interesting to talk about them and to think about them, and maybe in the future to find a way of how to research them academically also.
Yeah, if you look at the discussion in the chat, you see there's also another direction that meant is the two-dimensionality of the way we perceive animals. You know, they behave. There's only one behavior to the animals, and that's the animal behavior, as opposed to humans that, you know, they can be influenced by a religion, tradition, and all kinds of things. So that this was also part of my question about the methodology, because animals, as I suspect, I'm not an expert, also have different type of behaviors depending on different location.